ATSA 4002, abandone vía Charlie, contacte 121,9.
Entiéndame, ATSA 4002.
Perú 2450, viento 290 grados, 8 nudos, pista 16 izquierda, autorizada a despegar.
Autorizado a despegar, pista 16 izquierda, Perú 2450.
Perú 2120, Lima Torre Este, mantenga fuera de pista, tránsito, Airbus 320, nivel señal corto.
Fuera de pista, Perú 2120.
Hello again everyone and welcome back to the channel. In today's video we are going to be taking a look at the Sky Simulations Douglas DC-9. The aircraft was released a couple of months ago for Microsoft Flight Simulator, and I think it's fair to say that upon release, as we unfortunately see all too often in this hobby, the aircraft was in a fairly haphazard state. Certainly there were a large number of issues with the jet, and generally speaking quite a significant amount of bug fixing and improvement required really to justify the price point of the DC-9. Whilst that work should of course have been done ahead of release, Sky Simulations have, at least to their credit, continued to develop the add-on, and so in today's video we are going to be taking a look at version 3.1 of the jet. I think that many of you, like me, tend to enjoy these retro jets, find them more satisfying to operate than their more modern counterparts. I certainly had very high hopes for the DC-9. It is undoubtedly an aircraft that I wanted to see within the sim. We are currently on the ground in Bilbao on the northern shores of the Spanish coastline, and we're going to be operating an evening service back home towards Madrid. We're going to be cruising our way home at flight level 270, the flight time for our return sector just shy of 1 hour. We're expecting 98 passengers on board the jet, burning our way through about £5,500 of fuel en route, and very pleasant evening conditions here for the flight. Whilst the Sky Simulations Douglas DC-9 certainly isn't a study level add-on, it is nevertheless quite enjoyable to operate, and we're definitely going to be having some fun here today, flying a relatively complicated conventional SID here out of Bilbao, and again beautiful evening conditions for our arrival later on into Madrid. As always, I really hope you enjoyed the flight. If you do, please consider giving the video a like and subscribing to the channel, and if you would like to help support my content further, you can do so by becoming a channel member or patron. So good evening then, and welcome to the flight deck of the Sky Simulations Douglas DC-9. Once again, we are currently on stand 1 here in Bilbao, and we're going to be taking the aircraft back on its return service towards Madrid. We've more or less boarded a cold dark jet, though we have just fired up the APU. You can see that's now on the bus. We've got the APU air selected on and supplying the packs. We've also just made a few cockpit pre-selections here ahead of time. So for example, I've already set up the cabin pressure controller, I've set the speed bugs, and as well the EPA bugs. Some of the actuations in the flight deck do take quite some time, so just to cut down here a little bit in terms of the length of the video, again I've made some pre-selections. For the flight deck preparation checks then, the APU air once again is selected on, galley power is selected on, emergency exit lights will set through to armed, we'll take these signs on. We've already fueled up the jet, we've got £18,000 of fuel on board the aircraft, that's balanced there in the wing tanks. Meter select heat will set through to captain. Windshield heat will take on, no need for the engine anti-ice. We can carry out a stall test. Get there on system 1. And same there as well on system 2. We'll take the anti-skid through to armed. Your damper can go on. Carrying out a fire lever loop test. Testing system A. And system B. For the cockpit, cabin and temperature selectors, we'll leave those in auto. For the air conditioning supply and pressurization, once again already set up the cabin pressure controller. You can see there we've got a cruise flight level today of flight level 270. We're targeting a cabin altitude there of 4,500 feet. And for the cabin pressure controller handle, we'll set that through to the automatic position. Annunciator light test. Just working away here around the flight deck. And as you can see, all of our lighting is operative. Looking at the caution and warning panel, not seeing anything there that we're not expecting to see at this phase of the flight. The flight director coming down to the attitude indicator will come through to heading, and we'll pitch initially for 15 degrees. So the flight director is set. Speed bugs, once again we've got V2 plus 10 selected already. That's a speed there of 161 knots. No actual bugs that we can set here, just the speed datum. Would be nice to have bugs there to set V1 and VR of course. In terms of the heading, departing off runway 30 here this evening. So we'll set the heading bug here on the HSI. And the bug is set. In terms of our stop height on the SID, that will be flight level 80. So we'll just set the altitude alerter. As you can see again, some of the selections do take a little bit of time to actuate. And we have flight level 80. With the VHF nav radios, I've got Bilbao there on my side. Just take the DME on. On the first officer side, we'll tune up Pamplona. That's on a frequency of 112.3.
San Pedro 2450, contacte radar 119,7.
1123, and again just making sure we have the DME selected. So 1 mile there from the Bilbao VOR, that is correct, and showing 62 miles there to Pamplona, that looks good here as well. Initial course on the SID will be 312, we'll set that up on the CDI.
119,7, Lampero 2450, gracias.
There's 312. The position lights, those are set through to position only. For the altimeters, current QNH is 1006. And we've got 1006, that's giving us an aerodrome elevation there, just shy of 140 feet, that is correct. Versus the chart, and seeing the same there as well on the first officer side. That's about it then in terms of the initial setup. In terms of the brief, once again, departing off runway 30 here this evening, we're going to be flying a Pamplona to Foxtrot departure off runway 30. Aspect 10-3 Charlie, it's a conventional SID initially based off the Bilbao VOR, transitioning through to the Pamplona VOR. In terms of the chart notes, transition altitude 6,000 feet, aerodrome elevation 136 feet, max speed of 250 knots below 10, pretty standard. In terms of flying the SID itself then, with the initial climb clearance, again stop height of flight level 80, we're going to be climbing runway heading till 2 miles off the Bilbao VOR. It'll then be a right turn to intercept the 312 radial out towards 8 miles from the station. For the Pamplona to Foxtrot at 8 miles, making a right turn back towards the VOR, we'll come directly overhead, and then turning out towards the east, tracking 089 outbound towards waypoint February. From February, a right turn 144 to track inbound towards the Pamplona VOR. So the departure should be pretty good fun in this sort of aircraft. It's only going to be a fairly high workload for us. Ultimately departing out over the water initially, we've got a max speed restriction of 210 knots in the turn, and then coming back round out over the terrain. There is significant terrain, as you can see here, on the departure. We have an initial sector MSA of 6,200 foot for the turn, bringing us back round into the 7,000 foot, that's the highest sector MSA, as we come overhead the field and out towards February. Nice terrain there on the chart, 9,500 feet. Otherwise, lovely day here in Bilbao. Quite cool temperatures, 13 degrees, QNH 1006, and we have around 50 knots of wind out from the northwest, pretty much straight down runway 30. Lastly then, in terms of the taxi, once again we are currently on stand 1 here at the main terminal. We're going to be pushing back into the apron, and then we'll taxi out via Alpha 2, onto taxiway Tango, and down to Horning Point Charlie 2 for departure off runway 30. That's it then in terms of the brief, and I'll come back to you again ahead of the push and start.
Señores pasajeros, siguiendo normas internacionales de aviación civil, vamos a efectuar una demostración sobre el uso del cinturón de seguridad, chalecos salvavidas, máscara de oxígeno y localización de salidas de emergencia. Es importante que presten atención. Ladies and gentlemen, international safety regulations make it necessary for us to show you the use of the seatbelt, life jackets, oxygen masks and the location of the emergency exit. Please pay attention. El cinturón de seguridad debe permanecer abrochado siempre que la señal luminosa de cinturones esté encendida. Se abrocha y desabrocha como les estamos mostrando. The seatbelt must be fastened whenever the seatbelt sign is on. The seatbelt is fastened and unfastened as we are now showing.
Okay, so we have finished the boarding. We have all of our doors closed up. We'll just close up the cockpit door here as well. In terms of the before start checks, once again doors and hatches are confirmed closed. Fuel levers are off. VHF comm radios are set, not required here for the flight. For the transponder, Squawking 2000, we'll set that through to on. Pneumatic crossfeed valves are set through to open. Hydraulic pumps, take the engine pumps through to high, and the auxiliary pump on there as well. Ground power has been disconnected from the bus. Push clearance has been obtained. We'll take the anti-collision light on. Part braking come off. We'll initiate the push momentarily. It is going to take quite a bit of time here to get the engine started up, so we'll start the right-hand engine ahead of the push. Ignition can go to ground start. We'll take the packs off. We do have positive pneumatic pressure here ahead of the start, and for the fuel pumps we've got the left and forward pumps selected on there for both the left and the right wing tanks. So we'll start the number 2. We do have N2 rotation, waiting there till we're up through 20% before we introduce the fuel. As you can see there as well, oil pressure coming up. Okay, just commencing the push, we are underway. And there's our 20%, so fuel on. Okay, we do have a good light off. Oil pressure coming up. And again, quite an abrupt change there in sound as the engine spools up. I'll definitely be keen to try the FT Sim sound set for the aircraft, but I thought given that this was a review, we'll stick with the default sounds for the time being. We should see the engine stabilise here at around 35% N1. And we have a good start there on the number 2. In terms of the push, we'll stop ourselves here at being the taxi line, release the tug, park brake can go on, and we can start the number 1. Okay, tug is clearing.
Lamperu 2120, rueda posición y mantenga pistones en izquierda.
Posición y mantener una izquierda, Lamperu 2120.
Bit of an error there as well in terms of the fuel read. We pushed back with £18,000, now showing nearly £19,000. There's 20%, fuel on. If you keep an eye on the fuel totalizer there throughout the flight, you'll notice it's a little bit buggy in terms of its reading currently. Okay, good light off, oil pressure coming up. Ground crew are now clear.
Retomar 7165, abandone vía golpe en alta y contacte 1,9. Lamperu 2120, viento 280 grados 9 nudos, pista 6 izquierda, autorizada a despegar.
Autorizada a despegar 16 izquierda, Lamperu 2120.
And once more, just waiting here till we see 35% or thereabouts on the M1. And there's 35%, parameters look good, we do have 2 good starts. So the ignition selector can go off. We'll take the engine-driven generators now onto the bus. As you can see, there is a little bit of depth here in terms of systems modelling. APU can now come off the bus. We'll take the APU air off and the APU master off here as well. The air conditioning, we'll take that back through to auto. Fuel heats, not required. We'll take those off. In terms of the flaps, it's going to be a flaps 5 departure. And we have flaps 5 selected for the trim. We're looking for 3 units here on the THS. And we have 3 units set. In terms of the flaps then, flaps 5 indicated, slats extended with blue light. Auto brake not installed on the aircraft, speed brake is armed for the flight controls. We have full up, pull down, and neutral, full left, full right, and neutral, and on the rudder, full left, full right, and neutral. We are now clear for the taxi, nose light can go through to dim. We can take the park brake off. And in terms of the taxi, once again just making a right turn here, we'll track across the apron, out via Alpha 2, onto Tango, for holding point Charlie 2.
Lamperu 2369, viento 280 grados 9 nudos, pista 6 izquierda, autorizada a despegar. Autorizada a despegar. Alfa 036 Lima, listo en salida. Alfa 036, recibido, atento. Atento. Alfa 036, rueda posición y mantenga pista 6 izquierda. Voy a mantener pista 6 izquierda, alto.
Okay, so we are now lined up here on runway 30. We've got a beautiful sunset there ahead of us. In terms of the before takeoff items, the seatbelts and the signs are selected on, landing lights are set, position and strobe lights are set through to both, the 98 panel has been checked, takeoff briefing is complete, we'll carry out a takeoff config warning test, and the test is good. APU master is selected off, same here as well for the APU air, pneumatic cross-feed valves, Once again, I'll set through to open. Ignition selector is set through to ignition override. Exterior lights are set, and for the flaps, again, we have flaps 5 indicated with the slats extended. In terms of setting takeoff power, we'll just hold the aircraft here on the brakes as we let the engine stabilise. It's a fairly short takeoff run here out of Bilbao. So engines are stable, forward on the yoke, and take off. So thrust coming up, it does take quite a bit of time to reach our target EPA. Airspeed's alive. There's 80 knots. Easing off on that forward pressure on the yoke. Okay, it's 2.1 EPA, power is set, 100 knots. Ground handling in the jet feels pretty basic overall. A little bit of left rudder here to keep us on the centre line. Okay, it's V1. And VR back on the yoke. Again, the flight modelling doesn't feel particularly great here during rotation. The aircraft feels pretty heavy. Okay, we do have a positive climb. Gear can come up. We'll start trimming here to pitch for around 15 degrees nose up, maintaining V2 plus 10. And again, just holding runway heading till we're out through 2 miles from the Bilbao VOR. Okay, so good on the speed, just continuing to trim.
Perú 2369, contacte radar 119,7.
And approaching 1500 feet, we'll come back now towards climb power. Okay, it's 1 mile, just coming through the radial. That's to be expected, we're making the turn at 2 miles. We'll start pitching down here as well for the acceleration phase. We'll go now for around 10 degrees nose up. Still needing quite a bit of aft trim. So power is set. Speed is checked, we'll go through to flaps 0. So just the flaps extended, there's 2 miles. We'll start the turn now back onto the radial. Once we're established outbound, we'll take the autopilot up through 3,000 feet. Okay, on a good intercept heading, we'll set the heading bug.
Perú 2236, mantenga fuera de pista, tránsito Boeing 737 en final.
And we'll take the autopilot, so master on, heading select. We'll leave ourselves in vertical speed, we'll just reduce that rate of climb. And as you can see, establishing now back on the radial outbound from Bilbao. At 8 miles, we're going to make the turn back towards the station. Just coming up through 5,000, we're going for flight level 80, so we'll set the altimeters ahead of time. Got 2992 on my side, same there as well on the first officer side. Just hold the after takeoff items here till we've made the turn. And speed's checked, we'll retract the slats. Just to keep things a little bit simple here in terms of autopilot operation, it's not the most user-friendly system. So we're going to hold the vertical speed, we'll come back off the thrust here to maintain 250 knots. And we'll just continue to reduce that rate of climb. We can set the bug now for 250. The SID did call for 210 knots during the turn, but just to keep things simple again, in terms of single pilot operation and as well the automation, we'll clean the aircraft up, maintain 250 knots. There's 8 miles, so turning now back towards Bilbao.
Star Perú 3111, viento 290 grados, 9 nudos, pistón off izquierda, autorizado para aterrizar.
And we're doing 1,000 feet per minute on the climb, which is nice. That'll give us plenty of time here to get the jet leveled off. As you'll see in terms of altitude hold, again, the autopilot system is a little bit clunky. Obviously, to some degree, that is a function of its age, but also I find the sim setup does make it a little bit more difficult to use than it might otherwise be.
Autorizado aterrizar, pista 16 izquierda, centro 311.
So looking good here on the speed. We want about estimating 160 here on the heading inbound towards Bilbao. Just taking VOR1 there on the RMI. Okay, so there's 250 knots, 1,000 to go. There's our altitude alerts. Just quickly run through the after takeoff items. So flaps are retracted, slats retracted, gear is up, lights are out. Ignition selector can go off. And we can disarm the speed brakes. Same here as well, we'll get rid of the auxiliary hydraulic pump. And we can get rid as well of the nose lights. That is the after takeoff checklist complete. So approaching 8,000, again we'll reduce that vertical speed. Coming off the thrust here as we do so.
ATSA 066, contacte radar, 119,7 vuelo.
7, gracias, buen día, 06.
So basically for outhold we just need to set the pitch wheel here in the central position. It's not always immediately obvious though when you've actually got that selected. And the FMA up here, so it's a little bit tricky to see both at the same time. It'd be nice if there was just a click spot that would return the wheel to its neutral position. So you can see quite sensitive here as well. We've got out capture. Okay, 250 knots, tracking almost directly now inbound towards Bilbao. Just come right another 10 degrees. So you can see the airfield there off the nose. And we've got the port here out at our 1 o'clock. Really beautiful evening here on the northern coast of Spain. So we'll hold flight level 80, 250 knots once we come overhead the field. Looking to track outbound now 089.
Star Perú 3111, abandone pista vía Charlie, contacte superficie este 121,9.
Set 089 here on the CDI.
Llegando vía Charlie, superficie este 119, Star Perú 3111.
So 089. We'll turn about 2 miles before the station. There's obviously going to be a little bit of lag here in the turn. We're doing about 250 knots over the ground, so 1% of that ground speed will give us our estimated distance ahead of the turn. Once we commence the turn, we'll continue the climb. Again, our cruise flight level today, flight level 270. Okay, it's 2 miles, so coming out about now onto our easterly heading.
La Perú 2236, viento 290 grados, 9 nudos, pistón off izquierda, autorizado a despegar.
We're not going to worry too much about being accurate on the radial initially. Obviously, we're close in here to the station, so the CDI bar is going to be very sensitive. Once more, climbing out to flight level 270. As you can see again, it's going to take quite a bit of time here in terms of the selection. Ordinarily here I'd just come straight into IS hold to make the climb, coming back up to climb thrust, but again with the automation such that it is going to be easier initially just to do that in vertical speed. We've got 270, just coming overhead Bilbao, still in vertical speed, so we'll set for a rate of climb. And again, just coming up on the thrust, we'll maintain 250 knots, we'll just hold that till we're up through 10,000. At which point we can increase the thrust, give ourselves 300 knots, then we'll come into IS hold for the continuation here off the climb. Just enough time here for another little quick view of the Spanish coast.
La Perú 2392, Lima Torre Este, rueda posición y mantenga pistón off izquierda.
And as you can see, it should make for a really beautiful evening run here over towards Madrid.
La Perú 2236, contacte Lima radar, 119,7.
1,7 la Perú 236, gracias, Daniel.
Okay, approaching 9,000. Just increase that vertical speed slightly, maintaining 250 knots. And 1,000 to go here till we come up through 10. We'll just hold ourselves in heading for the time being, rather than coming into VOR hold. We're tracking outbound from Bilbao. out towards 29 miles before we make the turn inbound towards Pamplona. So about another 20 miles, and again we'll make that turn about 2 miles at a time, so looking to turn at 27 miles here on the DME. Once more already picking up Pamplona there, 57 miles towards the station. Just approaching 10,000, landing lights can go off. We'll set speed now 300 knots. And we've got enough performance here in hand that we can just come back towards climb thrust, the speed will increase, and then once we hit 300 knots, again we'll come back into IS hold. So we'll go with around 93% M1 here for the climb. Again, the engine sounds are fairly hit and miss.
La Perú 2392, viento 290 grados, 8 nudos, pista 6 izquierda, autorizado a despegar.
Autorizado a despegar, 6 izquierda, la Perú 2392.
There's climb thrust, you can see their speed is increasing, we'll just roll off that vertical speed. Just help that speed come up a little bit more rapidly. We'll cycle the signs here as well for the cabin crew. We can release the passengers momentarily here as well. In terms of the pressurization, you can see their delta P still increasing at the moment. I believe once that hits around 7.2 psi, we'll see the cabin altitude increase. Again, looking at a target there of 4,500 feet. Just approaching 300 knots.
La Perú 2392, contacte radar 119,7, óvulo.
There's 300, we'll come into IS hold.
Radar 119,7, la Perú 2392, buen día.
And again, just making sure we stay established on the radial. About 12 miles to run now before we make the turn. So that's about it then in terms of the departure. As you can see, a really fun little aircraft to fly, certainly quite taxing, quite demanding for these sorts of conventional SIDs. With all of that being said though, of course there is still plenty that could be improved on the aircraft. It would be nice to see some further improvements. We'll of course talk about that at the end of the video. But now then, in terms of our tracking, we'll continue outbound towards February, once again making a right turn over February, inbound towards Pamplona on the 324 radial. Overhead Pamplona coming onto a course of 205, that takes us towards the Barahona, Bravo Alpha November VOR, and from there we'll be picking up the arrival into Madrid.
Torre, buen día, la Perú 124, 6.5 millas en el localizador.
La Perú 2124, Lima Torre Este, buenas tardes, QNH 1011, continúa aproximación.
QNH 1011, continúa aproximación, la Perú 124.
La Perú 2390, viento 280 grados, 9 nudos, pista 6 izquierda, autorizado a despegar.
Pista 6 izquierda, autorizado a despegar, la Perú 2390.
La Chile 651, Lima Torre Este, buenas tardes, mantenga fuera de pista, tránsito final.
Mantenemos fuera de pista, una 6 izquierda, 651.
La Perú 2124, prevé a Charlie, viento 280 grados, 9 nudos, pista 6 izquierda, autorizado para aterrizar.
16 izquierda, autorizado a aterrizar, la Perú 124.
La Chile 651, rueda posición y mantenga, pista 6 izquierda.
Posición y mantener, pista 16 izquierda, 651. Lima Torre, buenas tardes, este es el 951 de Coeco, estamos atentos a la salida, pista 6 izquierda.
November 51 Eco, Lima Torre Este, mantenga fuera de pista.
Mantenemos fuera de pista.
La Perú 2124, dándole pista vía Charlie, contacte superficie este 121,9. La Chile 651, viento 290 grados, 9 nudos, pista 16 izquierda, autorizado a despegar.
Autorizado a despegar, pista 16 izquierda, una Chile 651.
Okay, so welcome back to the flight deck. We are now approaching our calculated top descent points. We've got about another 7 miles here till we hit the Barahona, Bravo Alpha November VOR. So now would be a good time to get the aircraft descending. Initial stop height we'll set 80 or flight level 80. Again, that's going to take just a little bit of time. Once we come overhead the VOR itself, we'll continue to track outbound and we'll brief up the approach. That's flight level 80, that's the last stop height there on the star. And we'll come back into IS hold. Start reducing thrust. We're looking for a descent rate here of around 2,000 feet per minute.
November 51 Eco, rueda posición y mantenga pista 6 izquierda.
Posición y mantener pista 16 izquierda, November 51 Eco.
So just coming overhead the station, we'll continue to track outbound 205. We've also got the Papa Delta Tango, the Perales VOR, tuned up here on nav2, 116.95. And once we're picking that up here on the RMI, we'll track that inbound towards Madrid. So descent rate looks good. We'll start briefing up the approach. In terms of the arrival then, initially we just came onto the Banev 4 Delta arrival. However, as you can see, that's an RNAV star. So instead of flying that specifically, we're tracking now outbound from Bravo Alpha November. And again, we're going to be tracking towards the Perales VOR, which is Papa Delta Tango, as soon as we pick that up. From Papa Delta Tango, we'll be joining on to the ILS for runway 32 right this evening. Let's plate 11-10, it's the ILS Zulu 32 right. Frequency is 109.1, we'll have to set that up later on. On approach course 323, the Cat 1 MDA is 2,105 feet. Profile check of 5,000 foot at 9.4 miles. And significant aerodrome elevation for the arrival today of 2,000 feet. In terms of the missed approach, it's climbing runway heading to 5.6 miles, left turn, max 185 initially, so we'll hold the slats if we need to make a missed approach. In terms of the terrain, once again significant at Madrid. We have high terrain essentially all around the north of the field. Sector MSA for us is 10,000 feet off the aerodrome reference point, and the highest charted terrain here as well is around 10,000. Otherwise, much as we saw out of Bilbao, overall a very nice evening here in Madrid. We've got a temperature of 11 degrees, QNH is now 1005, and again we'll have to wait to set that later on. Transition level off the chart is by ATC. In terms of the landing, we'll be landing 3-2 right, vacating off to the left. To do that, no auto brake, so manual braking. We use full reverse. It seems to be a little bit clunky trying to get anything other than full reverse here on the jets. And as well, it'll be a flaps 40 landing with a calculated VREF of 132, so V approach of 137. In terms of our fuel state, Zaragoza is the alternate for the flight today. We've got £13,000 now on board the jet, burning around £8,000 an hour. So just shy of 2 hours, about an hour and 40 minutes worth of extra fuel. That goes roughly with what I was planning. Approaching 20,000 feet, descent rate still looks good, 20 miles now out from the station. Still waiting here till we pick up the Perales VOR. We'll take the seatbelt signs back on. In terms of the descent and approach checks, the approach briefing is complete, seatbelts are on. Altimeters will hold, auxiliary hydraulic pump is selected on, windshield anti-fog is not required. Comms and nav radios, again for the time being, leaving ourselves on the Perales VOR here on nav 2. We can actually tune up now the ILS here on nav 1. So again, a frequency of 109.1.
Está Perú 5263, abandone pista vía Delta, apure y contacte 121,9.
109.1, obviously not picking up the DME for that just yet. The final approach course is 323. It's coming down through 20,000 feet, so we need about 60 miles to run towards the field. Just increase that vertical speed slightly.
Plan Perú 2408, viento 310 grados, 9 nudos, pista 16 izquierda, autorizado a despegar.
And there's 323 on the CDI. Just rolling off the thrust. Transition altitude is 13,000, so we may as well set the altimeter ahead of time. Again, QNH of 1005. We've got 1005 there on the left, same as well there on the right. So continuing on with our checks. Nav radio is tuned, CDI bar is set. No smoking signs are selected on. That is the descent checklist complete. Getting fairly dark, fairly late on in the evening now here in Madrid. We'll rig for silent running. We'll just get rid of the cockpit floodlights. And we can continue our descent inbound towards runway 32 right.
La Perú 2369, viento 280 grados, 9 nudos, pista 16 izquierda, autorizada a despegar. ATSA 066 Lima, listo la salida.
Buenas tardes, estamos listos.
ATSA 066, recibido, atento.
Atento.
ATSA 066, rueda posición y mantenga pista 16 izquierda.
Pulsa mantener pista 16 izquierda, ATSA 066.
Okay, so we're just tracking now inbound towards the Perales VOR, just coming down through 8,500 feet, so 6,500 foot there above aerodrome elevation. Maintaining just shy of 200 knots, we've now got the slats extended. And as you can see, approaching the glide here as well, so looking good in terms of our vertical profile. We'll make the turn inbound towards the Loke at 5 miles from Perales. We've got about 18 miles here to run on the ILS, so 6,000 feet, 18 miles, spot on. And just using vertical speed here at the moment to finesse the vertical profile.
Peru 2369, contacte radar 119,7.
We'll just reduce the thrust, roll that speed off towards 180 knots. We'll come through to flaps 5. Approaching 5 miles. Overall, I haven't had a lot of luck so far flying the ILS in the Sky Simulations DC-9. We'll talk more about that later on. See how we go here on the approach. So setting ourselves up on an intercept heading. Turning now for the Loke, looking good here on the glide. 7,500 feet, and again just reducing that thrust. Almost back towards idle now. Speed is checked, we'll go flaps 5. We'll come through to ILS now on the nav selector.
Peru 2236, mantenga fuera de pista, tránsito Boeing 737 en final.
So there's 180 knots, flaps 5 indicated. Again, established nicely here on the glide slope. Just keep increasing that vertical speed.
Star Peru 3111, viento 290 grados, 9 nudos, pista 16 izquierda, autorizado para aterrizar.
Looks like we can't do that anymore, assume we've already got glide slope capture.
Autorizado a aterrizar, pista 16 izquierda, Star Peru 3111.
We shouldn't really see that ahead of localizer capture. We are though visual with the runway, so we'll continue the descent. In terms of the missed approach altitude, that will be 6,000. So we can set that here on the altitude alerter. So at the moment the aircraft is flying the glide slope, just waiting here for the Loke to come in, but I find once we hit around 5,000 feet or thereabouts, the aircraft is going to want to dump the nose, which unfortunately loses the glide slope tracking. We'll see how we go. Okay, speed's checked, holding flaps 5 for the time being. We'll take the gear at 8 miles. Okay, so we've got Loke capture, glide slope capture. Looks like we're just correcting back towards the glides. Again, we'll see what the jet does. If it doesn't hold the glide slope, we'll just come into manual flight. Centering up the heading bug. And nicely established here now for runway 32 right. 12 miles to run. Just a touch faster on the speed. For the time being, we are still maintaining that glide slope and the Loke.
ATSA 066, contacte radar 119,7 vuelo.
And we'll just start getting configured a little bit early, again anticipating the aircraft might not fly the ILS quite as we want. There's the altitude alerter, again that's for the missed approach altitude. We'll take the gear down, arm up the spoilers, nose light through to bright. And we'll let that speed reduce back now towards 160 knots. As you can see, already set VREF or V approach here of 137. So for the time being, we are established nicely here on the glide slope. That is quite a high vertical speed though. I think that's going to take us below the glides. Looks as though the aircraft is just starting to correct. And we've got gear down 3 greens.
Star Peru 3111, abandone pista vía Charlie, contacte superficie este 121,9.
Just centering up the heading bug, speed is checked. Come through to flaps 15. Quite a big pitch up there with the flap selection. Again, we'll see how we go there in terms of the glide slope. So far the aircraft is actually maintaining the ILS quite nicely, which is the first flight I've made with the jet so far where I've seen that. Just set the DA here on the rad out, just to give us a call out. Again, for the MDA itself, we're looking at 2,105 feet. There's 160. We'll come through to flaps 40. Again, it's going to be a flaps 40 landing.
La Perú 2236, viento 290 grados, 9 nudos, pista 16 izquierda, autorizado a despegar.
Obviously, flaps 40 is a lot of drag, but I think even unrealistically so here in the jet. And there's VREF, 6 miles to run. Still established nicely here on the glide and the loc. So at the moment, gear down, flaps 40, indicated, slats extended. We've got about 85% here on the M1s, which again I think is far too high, at least versus a modern jet. For the landing checks then, we have gear down, 3 greens, flaps 40, slats extended with blue lights. Ignition is set through to ignition overrides. And once again, speed brakes armed, no auto brake, that is the landing checks complete. So once again, at the moment, looking pretty good here on the glide slope and the loc, showing 1 white, 3 reds there on the PAPI. Not unusual here in Microsoft Flight Simulator, we don't always get the correct indications on both the PAPI and the glide slope. Anyway, we'll do a little bit of manual flying, so we'll take out the autopilot. And the aircraft nicely in trim. I don't know where the issue lay with my other flights, but again, it wouldn't track the ILS, and when I took out the autopilot it was always out of trim previously. At this particular moment the aircraft seems nicely in trim and overall handles quite nicely. The flight model does feel fairly basic on the jet, at times it feels a little bit peculiar as well. So certainly room for improvement, again, in quite a few areas of the aircraft. And I hope that Sky Simulations does continue to work on the DC-9. I think many of us would like a truly excellent DC-9 within the sim. This is probably the only one we're going to get for the time being. Of course, if you do want a truly high fidelity Douglas aircraft experience, there's the Leonardo Mad Dog as well. But I think there's certainly a little bit more charm with the retro DC-9. Anyway, overall the aircraft in trim, nice and stable, easy enough to hand fly. Just trending back towards 2 whites here on the PAPI, that is going to put us a little bit higher on the glide slope. But we'll just continue visually for now. Once more, manual landing, manual braking, full reverse and vacating off to the left. There, a bit of nose up trim. As I say, this is by far the best I've seen the aircraft behave so far on the approach. Let's check 500. It's always tricky to know what causes these sorts of things in the sim. I think we'll just split the difference here between the glide slope. You can see we're well high now on the glide slope. Still showing low on the PAPIs, but we've got the touchdown zone in sight.
Minimum.
That's checked. We'll continue. We'll leave a little bit of thrust on here for the touchdown. Again, high drag aircraft, even with flaps 40. Be interesting to see how the aircraft actually behaves in a go-around. They're just reducing the thrust, not all the way back. In the end, getting quite a float out of the aircraft. There's touchdown. And full reverse. Again, no auto brake, so we'll just let the reversers slow the jet down for now. Feet off the brakes, and actually slowing down pretty quickly. They're already through 80 knots, so we'll cancel the reversers. And we can roll through to vacate. So there you go guys, I do hope you enjoyed our outing in the Sky Simulations Douglas DC-9. Once more, by no means a faultless add-on, there are certainly still a number of areas that could be quite heavily improved. Nevertheless, as you'll have seen, I did enjoy operating the aircraft overall. As usual, for the conclusion section here of the video, I will just expand a little bit on some of my thoughts throughout the flight. Starting then with the modelling and texturing, it is certainly worth noting that the livery used here in the video is a freeware livery available over on flightsim.to. The livery provided by Darth Otto, so a very big thank you to him, and certainly it is more detailed than the default liveries that you get available with the aircraft. However, with that being said, you do get a nice selection of liveries available with the jet by default. The external modelling and texturing, as you've seen during the video, is overall very nice. Certainly, there are other better add-ons out there in terms of the visuals, but I think the DC-9 looks pretty competitive with other aircraft that we see in the sim. Internally, the modelling is decent enough. It does look a little bit last generation, same as well with the texturing. The cockpit does look the part, but you've probably noticed that some of the modelling does lack a little bit in terms of polygons. And similarly, quite a lot of the texturing is fairly low resolution by Microsoft Flight Simulator standards. To my mind, the visuals are good enough. Sky Simulations has done a very nice job with the weathering and overall texturing effect, so the DC-9 does feel the part. Overall, the same is also true with the cabin. As you've seen, it's fully modelled and certainly good enough for me. In short, I do like the look and the feel that Sky Simulations have created with the DC-9, particularly at night. But by modern standards, again, particularly internally, the textures could stand to be of a higher resolution and the modelling could be more detailed. So far as the aircraft's flight model goes, it's definitely not one of the strengths of the Sky Simulations Douglas DC-9. It does seem to me as though quite a bit of work still needs to be done regarding the flight model. The aircraft feels simplistic to taxi, the same as well with rudder control during the takeoff roll. Rotation also feels rather strange. The aircraft is very sensitive, it seems, in terms of CFG and loading. To hand fly, the DC-9 feels okay. The jet feels okay in roll, again a little bit odd in pitch. It does need quite a lot of user input to fly a pitch angle. As I mentioned as well during the approach, the aircraft did feel as though it had too much drag in the approach configuration. Of course, I'm not familiar with the real-world DC-9, but having to maintain 85% N1 for a flaps 40 landing certainly seems very unlikely. On the subject of thrust as well, in terms of thrust setting, the aircraft behaves pretty strangely versus your hardware inputs. I found that I needed only very minor throttle inputs to adjust the range at the higher ends of the power spectrum. That does make it pretty tricky, for example, to come back from takeoff thrust through to climb thrust. Meanwhile, the aircraft does require much larger hardware throttle inputs down at the lower end of the thrust range. During the approach, again, the aircraft, as you saw, was controllable in the approach configuration, though it did feel rather odd. And of course, once again, the ground handling during the landing felt to be fairly simplistic. The Sky Simulations Douglas DC-9 didn't have any handling characteristics that completely ruined the experience for me, but to my mind, if what you're after is a highly realistic and complex flight model, then this add-on probably not the one for you. With regards to the systems modelling, overall I have to say the Sky Simulations DC-9 was a pleasant surprise. I didn't have the highest of expectations, and certainly, as you've seen, the aircraft is not study level. But there was some degree of depth to the systems modelling, certainly enough to make it feel as though you are operating a DC-9. It did seem to me as though quite a bit of the systems modelling is fairly surface level, but the vast majority of aircraft systems did seem to be modelled, at least to some degree. And personally, my lower threshold in terms of systems depth is the aircraft behaving as it should given a control or system actuation. The Sky Simulations DC-9 seemed to tick that box. The only issues that I really had with systems modelling, again, quite a few of the systems do take quite some time to actuate. Essentially, operating anything with a rotary selector can be quite laborious. And as you've seen, the autopilot is pretty basic, fairly clunky to use. Again, to some degree that is a function of its vintage. However, it would have been nice to see a few user-friendly options added. So for example, again, being able to click on the pitch wheel and reset it for an out-hold would have made things much easier. Despite as well a lot of iterations of the autopilot courtesy of Sky Simulations, it's still not a particularly robust system. Once more, to some degree that may be true to life, but you'll probably notice some deviations in out-hold, and again I had quite a few issues flying the ILS. Aircraft sounds are again another weaker area of the product. As I mentioned, I would be pretty keen to try the FT Sim sound set at some point with the add-on. In its default state though, the sounds of the Sky Simulations Douglas DC-9, again not really where you'd expect for this sort of price. Ahead of supplying AC power to the jet, you don't really get any internal sounds within the aircraft. As well, there are a number of switches and controls within the cockpit with no associated sound file. As well, quite a lot of the sound samples actually used on the aircraft are quite abrupt in terms of them cutting in and out. There isn't a whole lot of nuance in terms of system sounds within the flight deck, and similarly as well, not a big fan of the engine sounds overall. That being said, whilst the internal sounds are a little bit weak, overall I actually quite enjoyed the external sounds of the aircraft. I'm not entirely sure how true to life they sound compared to the real world jets, but they are nice and loud, and again I think decent enough, although there is a little bit of looping. In terms of product extras, I would say the aircraft is fairly mid-range. You do get 2 or 4 variants of the jet depending on how you wish to look at it. You get both the Dash 10 and the Dash 30 in passenger and freighter configurations, and once more 17 default liveries included with the package. You also get basic external ground equipment as we'd expect now from most add-ons available within the sim. So chocks, cones and external start cart included. You can also operate the aircraft doors as well as the front and rear air stairs. And in terms of documentation, you get a 124-page manual which does nicely outline the aircraft systems and their operation. As well, you get a paper checklist and performance data charts included. Lastly, in terms of the aircraft's FPS, overall the Sky Simulations Douglas DC-9 didn't seem to be too heavy on the frame rates. I was getting around 53 frames per second in Bilbao with custom scenery, full AI traffic, versus 59 plus in the default Cessna 152 under the same conditions. That then just about wraps up our look at the Sky Simulations Douglas DC-9. Overall, I did enjoy my time out in the jet. Again though, there are certainly areas that could be significantly improved, namely the flight modelling and the sounds. The add-on is pretty rough around the edges in many respects, but overall I don't think the DC-9 is a terrible effort. The product is however completely out of whack when it comes to the pricing. For this add-on you're looking at the same sort of money as the PMDG 737-600, the Phoenix Airbus A320 family. And to be frank, there are a whole host of other Microsoft Flight Simulator add-ons available for this sort of money and done to a much higher standard. For the pricing alone, at the moment it is very hard to recommend the add-on. Again, with a HD texture overhaul, a significant sound and flight model overhaul, perhaps the DC-9 could command that sort of money. At the moment though, to my mind, you'd have to be a huge fan of the DC-9 to pick the aircraft up at this sort of price point. And once more, at the moment, if you are looking for a high-fidelity Mad Dog experience, you are better off looking at the Leonardo MD-82. Whilst that aircraft, at least in the iteration that I've tried, does suffer from some low-resolution textures as well as a pretty subpar sound set, the aircraft is otherwise right up there with the very best in the sim in terms of systems depth and flight modelling. Anyway guys, once again I do hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, then please consider giving it a like. If you want to see more content from the channel, then please do consider subscribing as well. And once more, if you would really like to help support my efforts further, you can do so by becoming a channel member or patron, and I'll leave a link to both of those down in the video description below. As always, a very big thank you to my channel members and patrons for all of your support, it is very much appreciated. And to all of you, I do hope you're having a great day wherever you are. Take really good care, and I will see you all again soon.